All right, friends, let's knock out this last section of Chapter 18. How do we deal with air pollution? Well, there's been some laws established in our land. The Clean Air Act, the CAA, was created, and so was the Environmental Protection Agency, to enforce it in 1970. The Clean Air Act was most recently amended in 1990, and I'll talk about that coming up here in a little bit. There's the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the NAAQS, and they regulate 6 major pollutants, and we'll talk about which ones those are. And it has basically 2 goals here: primary standards, which is to protect human health, and then secondary, to protect the environment and property. The EPA has also established standards for 188 different HAPs, or hazardous air pollutants, and these are vary greatly, but there are chlorinated hydrocarbons and VOCs and toxic metals, so they're increasing the number of standards for different chemicals. So how do we know the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are the big 6 outdoor pollutants that they regulate? Well, if you remember nose clip, because you need a nose clip to save you from air pollution. Nose, the N stands for nitrogen oxides, O stands for ozone, S stands for sulfur dioxides, C stands for carbon monoxide, L's for lead, and P's for particulate matter. And we've already talked about that in a previous video, but these are the main 6 that it regulates. Now, when it comes to the Clean Air Act, it's done some really good stuff. So it's reduced the emissions of the 6 criteria pollutants by 49% over the course of about 26 years. So that's a huge reduction. So it's done a really good job with that. But I think some environmentalists would still point out that there's some deficits there. So we still rely on cleanup as opposed to prevention in the U.S. That's a problem. The U.S. Congress has failed to increase fuel efficiency standards for cars yet, and so that's creating hang-ups here. Regulations on emissions of motorcycles and 2-cycled engines remains not very adequate at all, to be honest with you. And there's really no regulations at all on ships coming in and out of American ports, which creates a lot of air pollution. But it can be improved. So let's take a quick look. Those deficits continue into airports. They don't really have many regulations. It doesn't regulate CO2, which is a huge greenhouse gas. It doesn't deal with indoor pollution. There's no regulations in reference to ultra-fine particulates. The urban ozone level is still too high. And it really doesn't, well, I just mentioned that already. It really doesn't deal with indoor air pollution at all, which is a big, huge problem. So how do we deal with that? And then, of course, we need better enforcement across the board, which means more funding and all the issues that come along with that. So the biggest change that's happened to the Clean Air Act was in 1990. There was an amendment that basically created emissions trading, or a cap-and-trade program. So they took 110 of the most polluting power plants around, and they have to now buy and sell the rights to put SO2 into the air. And so they can trade and barter. If they don't need them all, they can sell them to someone else, and vice versa. And what it did is it basically resulted in a decrease of 53% in the amount of SO2 put into the atmosphere. And it happened at a cost far less than what the projections were. Only 10% of what they thought it was going to cost is actually costing. So that's a great thing. And this conversation is now occurring to see if we're going to do it for NO2 and CO2 as well. What are some ways we help solve that problem of SO2 in the atmosphere? Well, a lot of it comes from burning of coal. So we have what we call electrostatic precipitators. Basically, as coal burns and you have the dusty air that comes up through the system, the air gets cleaned, and it gets cleaned by positive and negatively charged electrodes that basically polarize and attract the particulate matter. And so it can remove up to 99% of particulate matter. It doesn't handle ultrafine particles yet. Those are still a problem everywhere. But when it does that, the dust then, it charges them, they stick together, and they fall to the ground down here. So now we have this big pile of dust and debris that still needs to be taken to landfills and managed, and that's a problem. And it also uses a lot of electricity. So there's that. There's another approach which is called wet scrubbing. Wet scrubbers are basically where the air is coming up through this process, and as it comes up through this process, we spray water onto it. The water basically creates a sludge of all those particulates, and then we have to dispose of that sludge. Again, It's not very good. It's not very effective at removing ultrafine particles. It can remove lots of the SO2 and the large particles, though, 98% of them. So those are the two main ways we reduce it. So how do we take care of some of these issues? So if we have stationary pollution like power plants, what do? Well, we can burn better coal. We can remove the sulfur from the coal. We convert coal to a liquid or gaseous form, which helps. And so we can shift to other energy sources. Once we've done it, how do we clean it up? We can disperse the emissions over larger areas with taller smokestacks. We can remove pollutants after we've burned it, which is what scrubbers and stuff do, or we can tax it. On the motor vehicles, a lot of these are going to be similar ideas. How do you clean it up or require emission control devices? We need to inspect cars twice a year. We can set strict emission standards. Or we can prevent it by using mass transportation and walking, using less polluting fuels, improving fuel efficiency, getting older cars off the road, and give large tax write-offs to people with more efficient cars. Indoor air pollution. How do you prevent it? Well, clean ceiling tiles and things like that might have issues. Ban smoking unless you're in super well ventilated places. Restrict the chemicals that we put into new materials. Prevent radon from getting into your house by creating barriers and stuff. Use machines in well ventilated places and use less paints and pollutants in making of paints and thin cleaners and things of that nature. Once it's in there, how do you clean it up? You got to circulate the air. You got to clean it out more. You got to change the air out more frequently. You have to bring in outside air. You have to use adjustable air vents. You have to use more efficient stoves. You need to use exhaust hoods and stuff when you're cooking, things like that. Just more air transfer, basically. Moving on to indoor versus outdoor pollution solutions. So outdoor, we need to improve energy efficiency to reduce fossil use. We need to rely more on natural gas. Rely more on energy from renewable energy sources, and be better at being energy efficient with renewable energy prevention technological improvements in a nutshell. Indoor, we need to reduce poverty, of course. Distribute cheap, good cooking, solar cooking devices for people, especially in developing countries. Ban indoor smoking, and develop simple, cheap indoor pollutants. So depending on, we can create tests to test for those things. All right, all done.